Why is this? I mean, one can imagine why, Eswar, but why in particular do you say it couldn't have come at a worse time?
Well, China's economic growth has been slowing, which is one factor. And the other factor is this is a very important period in China when there is a lot of consumption, a lot of travel. So what we're going to see as a result of this outbreak right now around the Spring Festival time is a hit to both consumption as well as to production. On consumption, we're going to have lesser consumption of durable goods, of consumption goods in general, but also consumption of services, including tourism, travel, restaurants, retail trade are all going to take a hit. The other unfortunate aspect is that consumer and business sentiment, which has taken a hit in China, we're just beginning to bounce back up thanks to the US-China Phase 1 trade deal. And this is going to hold that back. So that's going to have potentially longer-term effects, even if this outbreak turns out to be temporary and can be controlled.
Is there any way to estimate at this point what you think the economic impact will be on China, given we have 56 million people under some form of travel restriction? And obviously, we've seen our reporting from Beijing, not a lot of people doing much of anything right now.
It's a little difficult to quantify at this stage, but certainly the 6% growth target for China for 2020 becomes somewhat harder to attain. But a lot also depends on the policy response and how persistent the shock turns out to be. If it turns out that in the next few weeks this outbreak can be controlled, then there is going to be a significant hit to growth in the first quarter. But if the government pulls out some stimulus measures, both in terms of fiscal and monetary policy, the total growth for the year can still be sustained. But if this lasts into the next quarter or beyond, it's going to have fairly significant effects, not just on China, but also for many other economies in Asia and beyond.
How are they managing to build Eswar 1,000-bed hospitals in a matter of days? And how much power to address the problem lies beyond that rather interesting video they've managed to put on social media?
No, one of the interesting questions is whether the Chinese government is being more open this time than during the SARS outbreak, because that's going to be crucial in terms of assessing the extent of the problem and how soon it can be contained. All appearances suggest that the Chinese government, after some initial hesitancy, is becoming much more open in terms of admitting the scale and scope of the problem, which provides some ground for optimism. Now, in terms of constructing hospitals, China can always put together resources in a way that few other economies can. So if an economy is capable of controlling this, it's probably going to be China. But China is also a heavily populated economy with many population centers where there is a very high population density. There is a lot of travel typically around the country at this time of the year. So channels for the transmission of the virus are also much greater, even if the containment efforts are going to be very, very serious.
Yeah, this time of year. I mean, this also coincides with the Chinese Lunar New Year holiday. How does that impact, the stimulus that holiday traditionally brings, and the fact that it's sort of been extended indefinitely or into February?
That's where the hit to both consumption and production become very important. This is a very important time in China for families to get together, where people go back to their hometowns if they are migrants. So the amount of travel, the amount of consumption usually gives a pretty good boost to Q1 data. And in particular, it gives a boost away from investment-driven growth towards consumption-driven growth, which is something the Chinese government has been trying to push for a long time. So this is certainly going to set that back. And certainly the negative effects on consumer and business sentiment, given that this unfortunate shock comes at this time, is going to be much greater than it might at a different time of the year.
So what is the ultimate impact going to be on the global economy, in your opinion? Again, understanding that it is too early to sort of, in a real way, assess the damage. Nonetheless, we know how important China is. You do seem to be talking about shaving significant amounts of growth off of GDP there. So what would be the broader impact?
Again, one can talk more about the channels and a precise number, and the channels are quite clear. China is very important in terms of consumption from the rest of the world. It imports a lot of commodities, and we've seen the shares of many commodity exporting firms already falling. It's hurting the exchange rates of many countries that export to China. China is a crucial part of supply chains. China sends a lot of tourists to many countries in Asia. So it's not just China, but the fact that many Asian countries are going to get hurt. And Asia has become a key driver of global growth in recent years. So now we have India slowing for a variety of other reasons, and the Chinese economy also proving to be something of a drag on the world economy. That's going to be a fairly significant hit on world growth.
Any way to estimate the impact on trade? Trade volumes last year were weak, and that was one of the reasons the global economy didn't perform as well as expected.
Yeah, from China's point of view, again, given the disruption in supply chains, it's going to hurt China's exports. It's going to hurt China's imports as well. Both of these had begun to rebound towards the end of last year, and that rebound is certainly going to get set back by what happens. But all depends really on how persistent this outbreak turns out to be and how much it can be contained within the first quarter. If it spills over into the second quarter and beyond, one can very easily see this taking up to a quarter to half a percentage point of world growth, although that will again depend to a great deal on what sort of stimulus we see from China once this outbreak is settled.